Today, the International Court of Justice began hearings against Israel for the genocide in Gaza. And this case, brought by South Africa, is backed by the 57 countries of the OIC and the 22 countries of the Arab League, and in fact, the entirety of the Global South. You know, many people wondered how this case would go, whether or not the ICJ would rule against Israel or not. Rule that, yes, in fact, genocide is being actively committed against the people of Gaza. You know, it's understood that the ICJ is a political institution, and its rulings are heavily political and subject to political pressure. So people have wondered, and reasonably so, what are the chances that they will actually rule against Israel, while Israel has always been fully backed by the Western powers, and the ICJ has become regarded as a tool of the Western powers, particularly of the United States. Well, you didn't have to wait for very long to see which way the court was likely to go. First of all, the evidence that's being presented by South Africa is absolutely irrefutable and damning. Their case is supremely well evidenced and meticulously detailed, and literally cites the genocidal words of Israeli officials themselves, including Netanyahu himself, and directly connects those words with the actions of the Israeli military in Gaza. So it's absolutely a devastating case, and it's impossible, frankly, to argue against it. Certainly it's impossible to argue against it with any degree of seriousness or with any comparable standard of evidence and reason as is being presented by the prosecution. Just from the first day of testimony, Israel and the United States were completely and immaculately defeated. And if you had any doubt that they realized this, that Israel and the United States realized this, then there's nothing that could have proved it more than what the U.S. did later that day, that evening, in fact, that same evening. They attacked Yemen. They attacked Yemen because they knew that they're going to lose in the International Court of Justice. This is a very desperate, very pathetic form of doubling down. Imagine, their response to the irrefutable proof of genocide in Gaza is to escalate and to expand the violence, to defend the genocide. They cannot defend the genocide in court, so they decided to compound the brutality by spreading it. They defend carnage by means of carnage. And that's the American way. They've lost the support of the world because they lost the awe of the world. They lost the respect of the world. And they lost the fear of the world. They're backed into a corner in the world court, and they're being exposed. And they're being ensnared by the very system that they created. The system that they created to protect their impunity and to prosecute their opponents. The mechanisms of law that they constructed to oppress and to persecute and to immunize themselves is now being turned against them. So they resort to what they always resorted to. They resort to what they created that whole system to enable them to do, which is savage, primitive, brute force and violence. The layers are being peeled away. The veneer is being stripped off. You know, America has been king of the hill for all these years, and they're being pulled down that hill. And not only that, the hill itself is pulling them down, and all they can do is lash out. I'm telling you, what we're seeing right now is a victory. Their vicious, barbaric instincts are only accelerating their downfall. By attacking Yemen, they're just showing the world, and showing the world court, that yes, it is genocide in Gaza, and it is genocide in Gaza because we think our capacity for violence makes us superior, makes us supreme, and our capacity for violence entitles us to be violent. And so what? What are you going to do about it, world? Because what were the Houthis doing except trying to stop the genocide? They weren't doing anything but enforce a blockade against a criminal regime, a terrorist regime, a genocidal regime. So how are you going to punish them for that, except that you are criminal and terrorist and genocidal yourself? Well, look, nobody is with them. I mean, their coalition against Yemen fell apart weeks ago, and no one joined them in their airstrikes except the UK. The whole world has left them. Even Western countries don't want any part of this. They're just making it worse on themselves. We are literally witnessing an American meltdown. And I believe, very importantly, that this is also because the owners and controllers of global financialized capital are abandoning them. You know, America hollowed itself out for decades. They transferred power and authority to the private sector. And now they're being left empty. And there's nothing left but those barbaric instincts and violent tendencies. And they're being isolated. And their own instincts, their own tendencies, are just isolating them further. They think that they can act like they used to act, do what they used to do. But you see, this was only ever possible in the past because the world was willing to capitulate. It was only ever possible because the world acquiesced. And the world only ever capitulated and only ever acquiesced because they didn't have any other options. That isn't the case anymore. And the case in the international court demonstrates that. While this case could never have been made 30 years ago or 20 years ago or 10 years ago or even 3 years ago. I mean, the case never would have been accepted. It never would have been heard by the court. The case for genocide certainly could have been argued for 75 years. In fact, it could have been argued for a century, but the court would never have allowed it. The court would have never heard it before now. The very fact that this case is being heard and was initiated by BRICS, supported by the OIC, supported by the Arab League and the whole global South, demonstrates that America's time is up.